It's been a while, guys. Took a few days after the finale of the Year of Final Fantasy stuff because that sucked. That was hard to complete, but we finally did it. And anyway, I'm back doing a bunch of different variety of videos. Today, we're going to do the top 10 Nintendo 64 RPGs. Now, that being said, a little bit before we get started, there's a couple caveats here. Because the Nintendo 64 didn't really have a lot of RPGs, or a lot of games, just in general, but it definitely wasn't known to be the RPG system of the time. That obviously went to PlayStation, which we'll get to that a little bit later. That's going to be a hard, very difficult console to do an RPG top 10 on. But anyway, some of the RPGs here are not going to be the RPGs that you think of. I'm going to have to expand that genre a little bit to include, obviously, action RPGs or things similar to that. At least if they have a little bit of an RPG feel to them, we'll go ahead and take that. But there's going to be a few on here also that are going to people just won't agree on, right? Very, very much won't agree on. But again, it's my list. I know a lot of people think these are trash, kind of where I put them, but sorry, I don't know. I like it.
Number 10, Aiden Chronicles: The First Mage.
Aiden Chronicles is probably one of the most overlooked games on the system. It was developed by H2O and published by THQ. THQ kind of led the forefront of this RPG Nintendo 64 era, which there's only like 2 or 3 of them, but whatever. Like many of these Nintendo 64 games, it hasn't aged graphically, not very well anyway. And now, if you go back and look at it, well, you'll be seeing video of it here. It's very, very difficult to look at. But anyway, it's probably one of the most classical Western RPGs on the system for sure. It was released in 2001, makes it one of the last releases of the system, or at the very tail end of the system's life. To put that in perspective, this was 2 years after the Dreamcast launched and 1 year after the PlayStation 2 launched. So they were still putting out Nintendo 64 games right up until the end there, before the GameCube came out. But the game was ambitious, and that's basically it. Just, I don't know. Wasn't great, but it was a notable RPG. So let's put that on there.
Number 9, Harvest Moon 64.
Published by Natsume, released in 1999. Harvest Moon 64 was the third in the Story of Seasons game line. If you've been a gamer for any appreciable amount of time, you're going to have heard of Harvest Moon in some way, shape, or form. And in fact, the people that haven't have probably heard of Stardew Valley, which kind of comes off of Harvest Moon. Different take on it, a very good take on it. It's a farming simulator where you control an abandoned farm. You build the farm up. It's kind of a life simulator too. A lot of them had, marriage and stuff like that. So it's a very chill, relaxed game, no matter what the platform. More of the later series came out. You had gimmicks and stuff like that. Rune Factory actually was kind of a splinter off of Harvest Moon, which dealt a little bit more in combat and stuff like that. Either way, most of the Harvest Moon games are fantastic. Here, I know a lot of people that think Harvest Moon 64 is the best, and that's why I put it on here. I never played it much. That's why it's so low, I guess, on the list. But Harvest Moon 64, good game. Play it.
Number 8, Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber.
Ogre Battle 64, Person of Lordly Caliber was, again, a fairly late release. And coming out on October 7th of 2000, it was developed by Quest and published by Atlas in the US. The game follows a niche Ogre Battle series. You may have heard of it, but a lot of people haven't. First appeared on the Super Nintendo. At least the first one that I played was on the Super Nintendo. And it was different, for sure. It was more of a real-time strategy RPG, not turn-based in the classical sense of what you would think a turn-based strategy tactical RPG would be. It had a rather darker story for sure, and if I were to give you a reference of how this game feels, it's more of a feudal lord kind of deal. A lot of it gives me the feeling of a Game of Thrones type situation rather than your standard high fantasy kind of fare. But it was actually one of the better games on the system, especially if you're going for that medieval kind of RPG game. And it's one of the best real-time strategy games on any system, barring PC, of course. So definitely give it a look. I think it's actually pretty expensive nowadays, though, so do what you can. But it's good to play.
Number 7, Paper Mario.
So, all right, Paper Mario, when this came out, people were not happy. People were livid, in fact, as they were told that we're going to get another, Mario RPG. And people instantly thought, well, okay, the cult classic, complete hit, probably not even cult classic, just a fantastic game, Super Mario RPG on the Super Nintendo. We figured we were going to get a sequel to that, and that kind of style and that kind of gameplay. Geno, Mallow, all of them coming back. That was not the case. Not at all. After the game did release, though, we did see a lot of people change their tune, because even though this game wasn't what we thought it would be, it's still a really goddamn good game, right? And people kind of forgot about Super Mario RPG, maybe not entirely, of course, but these Paper Mario games were good enough to serve on their own and really tide us over until that eventual release that has actually never come yet. But anyway, Paper Mario has built itself a legacy, and people really enjoy that. This is no Thousand Year Door, but it's definitely up there. In fact, it's one of the better Paper Mario games just in general, but it's definitely a fantastic entry, especially for being the first entry in a franchise.
Number 6, Mega Man 64.
So Mega Man 64 was a surprise because it was a port about Mega Man Legends on the PlayStation. And this is a rare instance in where a PlayStation game was ported over to the 64. A few times it happened, but Mega Man 64 is what we're looking at today. And it does have its drawbacks because of the limited space on the cartridge itself. And it did have some positive things over the game as well, being the loading and stuff like that being on a cartridge. This game, just in general, being this or Mega Man Legends, the PlayStation version of the game, was praised as one of the great 2D to 3D transitions. And of course, this was before Metroid Prime came out, which people, hold that in the highest regard. But Mega Man 64, definitely a must-play. If you never owned a PlayStation, definitely get it on the 64. If you did own it on a PlayStation, you should probably go for that more, because you could have complete total voiceovers and stuff like that. It's clear why people really, really enjoyed this series, because we have this. There's Mega Man Legends 2 on the PlayStation. It never came over to the 64, but a lot of people were pissed off that we didn't get Mega Man Legends 3, which was supposed to be on the DS or 3DS. I forget which one. You can clearly see why people were so angry about that.
Number 5, Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask.
So, Majora's Mask, lots of people's favorite Zelda game, bar none, and it's easy to see why that is. Majora's Mask is a very deep and complex narrative, especially for a Zelda game, where you live the Hyrule, or I guess I should say the Termina version of Groundhog's Day, because this game doesn't really take place in Hyrule. It's actually 3 days that repeat again and again and again and again, where you have to save the world from this creepy, weird horror apocalyptic moon with a creepy face. Somewhat recently we did get a 3DS version of this, and people were clamoring over that after the Ocarina of Time remake, and it was fantastic. I beat it in its entirety for the first time since I had on the 64. The 64 version, though, did have an incredibly quick turnaround time from Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask. It only took like 2 years or something. And Majora's Mask took what Ocarina of Time had made great and put its own personal twist on it. It's not a save the world type of deal. Well, I guess it technically is, but it's really more of a Link looking for his friend, and if you believe the rumors, going mad version of the story, which actually does lead into Twilight Princess. I like that rumor, but I won't go into it here. Anyway, Majora's Mask did give us a very cool idea of allowing us to play as different races in the game, because the masks themselves you put on and you turn into that race. Zora, Deku, and a Goron. And being a Zora is absolutely awesome. It's one of the reasons why I really enjoy this game. It's not my favorite Zelda game, of course, but I can see why a lot of people love this game to death, and it's definitely a must-play at least once, and whenever you do play it, I would go in 100%. It's definitely worth that time.
Number 4, Mystical Ninja starring Gohan.
Here we have my first introduction to this particular franchise, although I'm sure I played it on the Super Nintendo beforehand. This game is incredibly obscure, just in the grand scheme of things. It's really weird. For those that don't know, or those that do, this game is completely amazing and oozing with charm. Here you get to go on an Asian-inspired adventure with their mythical origins, Far Eastern mythical origins, and you eventually meet characters, and you can switch between these 4 characters, each of them having their own special thing about them. It's I haven't played it in a while, but I remember it being a little bit of a more Metroidvania type of thing, where you get this character and he can do this cool thing to get to this next portion of the world, which is fun. It was great. I loved everything about this game. It was definitely one of the best games that I could have picked up to hold me over until the big one that came out, which we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Number 3, Gauntlet Legends.
So Gauntlet Legends blew my mind in the arcade. I have very fond memories of playing it back in the early 90s, and I was super hyped to hear that this was coming to the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation. But one of my favorite games of all time, just period, is Gauntlet Dark Legacy, which is this game, but just more of it. Though we would get Dark Legacy eventually on a Nintendo system, Legends is sort of a mishmash of different realms that the original arcade version had. The game is pure multiplayer heroin. Like, this is one of the best multiplayer games on the console. It took the 4-player multiplayer aspect of the 64, and that's what really made it shine, because whenever it did release on the PlayStation, it was only 2 players, and this game is meant to be played with 4 players. It's basically one of the best party games of all time, aside from, I don't know, Mario Party, I guess. Whatever the case, though, I do love this game so much, and I definitely admit that my nostalgia plays a part in this game being so high on the list.
Number 2, Quest 64.
Here is where people are going to have a huge problem. Quest 64, how the hell did this shitty game make it to number 2 on the top 10 list of the Nintendo 64, especially when we have great games like Majora's Mask, Mystical Ninja, and the others? Well, I'm going to be honest with you, nostalgia, of course. There's more to it than that. I'm not going to try and sell you on the game. A lot of people hate it, and I can understand why you do. However, it was one of my first role-playing games that I enjoyed on the system. I'm not saying it's a good game, but I enjoyed this for what it was on the system. So the story is, you're this child adventurer, Brian, and you're going to track down your father and what this, in this particular book called the Ella Tale book, which is your MacGuffin, essentially. And here you have a lot of unique aspects to the game that we hadn't really seen before. First, one of the biggest reasons that I love it is the leveling up is actually a elemental system where you have earth, fire, wind, and water, and every time you level up, you do get to put one ability point into one of those elements, like I said, earth, fire, wind, and water, each of which focuses on a different type of thing while you're in battle and out of battle, actually. So water would heal you, earth would, have more protective value for you, wind would be a long-ranged attack kind of thing, fire, obviously, lots of damage there. So you get the gist of it. Much like Final Fantasy II, the battle system, well, I'm going to say much. You're probably more familiar with Elder Scrolls, but anyway, whenever you get into battles here, whatever you do in the battle will increase that attribute whenever you level up. So if you're going to hit people with your staff, you're going to get more offense and defensive physically. And whenever you use a particular element, you're going to get better at that element whenever you level up. So the battle system itself is actually pretty cool, even by today's standards. What happens is that you do get random battles as you're running along, but it's not a Final Fantasy, you attack, that kind of thing. You can actually run around in the 3D environment. It's a lot like Chrono Trigger in the way that the battles are held in the open space environment. There's no transition screen to a flat backdrop like a Final Fantasy game. I love this battle system because while the enemies are attacking you, you have this ring, and you can actually run around the ring as they're attacking to block their spells or whatever have you. It's really cool. The biggest complaint I see with this game is that it's very simple, and in fact there's no money to be spoken of, or at least not in any way that you would think of buying like a armor or new weapons or something like that. There's none of that in here. But honestly, as I was playing it, I never even noticed those things because it does have that unique elemental aspect of leveling up. So I didn't really care. The game is actually not terribly long. It's fairly long for a Nintendo 64 game, but it's not like 60, 70 hours long. And I just had a really fun time with the game. I don't know. I like Quest 64. I'm one of the very, very few people that did, but it really had an impact on my gaming in that portion of the Nintendo 64 era. Course, it's number 1, obviously. Fire is also hot and water is wet, if you didn't know. But I mean, what can I even say about this game that hasn't been said a billion different times over and over and over? Ocarina of Time is classic in every sense of the word. I remember being hyped up beyond belief for this game. I was in 8th grade, and every morning they would drop us off right in front of the gym, and we would wait there until classes started. I went around to everyone like, Ocarina of Time coming in 7 days, 6 days, 5 days, 4 days, this game took over my life 100% completely. I don't think I've ever been as hyped for a game as I was for this game in my entire life. This game is analogous to Mario 64 in that it basically did a perfect transition from 2D to 3D in the Zelda format, where Mario did in the Mario format, of course. If you're a dumb timeline theorist like I am, you know that Ocarina of Time is sort of the pivot point for the entire series. It's ground zero, if you will, because of all the time traveling aspects and splitting timelines, parallel universes and stuff. I may go into all that in another video later on down the road. This is the first Zelda game where we see a lot of different races of Hyrule. We had never really seen that before. We get a little inkling of it in A Link to the Past, where you go and visit the Zora waterfall. But here, I mean, we had full-on like Goron, Zora, Gerudo, Deku Scrubs, if you want to, talk about that, the Kakiri, lots of different races here. It's one of the first games also to have a huge internet following, and as such, there were a ton of rumors, all of them unsubstantiated. If you were on the internet back then, like I was, you probably read pages and pages of like, how to get the Triforce. You got to beat the Running Man by a second, and then go to Jabu Jabu's, domain and find the chicken, and then glide among over the mountains and stuff like that. It was stupid stuff, and you know what? I did pretty much all of it. You got to go behind the Temple of Time through the bushes and go to the Unicorn Fountain, and you'll get the Triforce. And oh man, looking back, it's embarrassing how long I spent trying to do all that stuff. But this game took over my life. It's just a must play. Of course it is. It's Ocarina of Time. Now, that being said, I would say to play the 3DS version, because after you've played that with the remade graphics and everything, it's very, very difficult to go back to the Nintendo 64 version. I can't actually go back and play this again. I'll always go to the 3DS version just because it's such a well done game. But honestly, Ocarina of Time, one of the best games ever made. And on the 64, this was a must-have game for the system. In fact, this was a system seller, just much like the way that Breath of the Wild is now for the Switch. So thank you for watching so much. If you like the stuff that I'm doing, subscribe, Patreon, we got that, Crystarium.net, patreon.com/Crystarium.net for $1 a month. If not, just spread it around, give me validation, right? But anyway, other than that, if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. I don't care. Helps me on the channel either way. But I'm sure everyone saw this coming, Ocarina of Time being number one. But hey, we're going to get to the hard system here. I don't know if I'm going to do it next, maybe a little bit further down the line, but the PlayStation will be coming up, top 10 of that. Man, it's going to be a difficult one. But anyway, as always, until next time, Mr. Warriors, keep on gaming. Bye-bye.